The reason why I think we call it design thinking and not pink thinking or creative thinking is that there are two reasons, I think. One is that the tools we use to tell stories and to facilitate are the typical tools of design, storytelling. So the ability to translate an idea in something that is visual. Could be a prototype, could be a story, could be a video, it could be a sketch. You know, that's typical of the design. The second reason, I think, is that the only community trained to think in that way is the design community. I mean, you go to school and they teach you to think in that way. You work in a design team,
a problem, to find a solution,
to think holistically, to use the different disciplines, to connect all of them. When you study law, they don't teach you that. When you study marketing, they don't teach you that. When you study, you know, as designers, they teach you how to sell your product, but they teach you also how to create a better product for a better society. So there is not just the business approach. They teach you how to leverage new materials and new technology, but also how to price position the product in the best way. They teach you how to make that product. They teach you what are the visual tools that you can use in the process. So all of this is the training that you receive as a designer, and eventually, even if you don't receive the training because some of the universities are more focused on the artistic side of design, that's the way a design firm, so that's the way Dana or me in my organization, we measure the performance of our team. We reward the people that are able to think in that way. So as a designer working in a design firm or in a design team in a corporation, you must think in that way. If you don't, you will fail. If you do, you will succeed. And so to find those kind of thinkers is very easy to find those kind of thinkers in the design community, because that's the way they're trained and that's the way they are rewarded and they succeed. But again, one of the most amazing design thinkers that I met in my life is Art Fry, the inventor of Post-it. I was having lunch with him a few weeks ago, and the way of thinking of this guy is really what we define design thinking. He was not aware of this. Design thinking was not defined at the time, but he was a typical design thinker in everything he was doing. And he was a scientist, but in his own way, he was using visual tools, prototypes, in experimentation to do what he was doing. Today he left 3M, he has a badge to get in 3M anytime he wants, but he retired, and he's involved in so many different kind of entrepreneurial new ventures kind of activities. He's a dreamer. He's trying to find new things and new solutions, innovation, and he's not that young anymore, but he's driven by that kind of passion.
And I actually think corporations that have those, I call them gurus inside, those champions or those dreamers or inventors, that's so highly underrated to have that. I remember the first week I walked into the design studio at Harley Davidson, and I saw Willie G. Davidson. His grandfather founded the company with colored pencils, drawing the word Harley Davidson on a sketch of a tank, and 2 or 3 other of his apprentices were writing the name on the tank. And I, as a trained typographer and designer, I said that, that's really interesting. Why don't you have typeset? And he said, well, it wouldn't be a Harley Davidson tank if the letters weren't hand drawn. And he wasn't trained in traditional typographic skills like I was, but he was a champion inside the company, and his job was to make sure that process and that level of detail and that sort of emotional fulfillment of the brand wasn't diluted. And I think it's very, very easy for corporations to find reasons to exit those activities because they're not productive or they're not seen as rational. But I think the great companies, you look at the story at Apple when the cost to put the chrome plating on the back of the original iPod added substantially more to the product and manufacturing cost, and they probably could have made a lot more money for themselves and their shareholders had they just made that one piece of injection molded plastic. And Johnny Ives basically put that on there as a response to, as a child, seeing his father take out a Dunhill lighter out of his pocket that was chrome plated or sterling, and every time he put it back, he would shine that that lighter on his pant leg, and it was this emotional and tactile design experience that he never forgot. And sure enough, when you used to see people with that chrome plated, they would rub that and shine that. You know, that kind of affinity or emotional connection that you can embed into a product or a service, and those champions within a company that can make sure that those virtues and attributes don't go away. I think those are becoming sacred, especially in this age where we need more authenticity because things are becoming more viral and businesses are being challenged to be more profitable and productive. But you can't rule out the need to understand and embrace the role design, the role emotion, the emotional roles that they can play.
No, there is something I really, I love the Harley Davidson story because, it's really defining the importance of telling the story. So I guess that many people looking at the graphic on the tank, they wouldn't know that it's handmade. And some executive, in a corporation may think, most of the people don't even notice the difference. So just, let's use a standard process to make it. But the reality is, first of all, it's important to tell the story. So Harley is, I guess, telling the story. So people know about that. And the story make that graphic more romantic. It gives cultural depth to this. You know that there was somebody taking care of those details.
Right.
And so that is what, from a design standpoint, is probably almost exactly the same. But what the story that there is behind is what is creating that amazing experience. And so that's why I think, designers are cultural agents inside corporation, or when they work for corporation, they're able to create, to make any product, any solution, any brand, any service more romantic, to give cultural depth, to tell those stories that are really important to create that amazing emotional connection when you own a specific product, when you own, a Prada shoe or an Armani dress, and you know what there is behind. And eventually, another brand, less expensive, may do a shoe or a blazer that are very similar, but what there is behind the brand and the story, the brand, the craftsmanship.
That's what you talk about as brand activation. That's
Well,
what you mean by that?
Well, no, I would call that more brand meaning. That to Mauro's point, it's the narrative is so rich and so important to unlock within a company. Customers, by the way, consumers, I should say, are searching for that narrative, and in fact, they're demanding it almost.
So they can belong to the story too.
And people are just by nature curious, and they want to know more about the companies they're buying products for, and they want to have a deep emotional connection. And if they do, by the way, they're going to stick around longer, and they're going to create advocacy around your brand because it matters to them. And I think that the statement "design matters" is, while it sounds rather simple and contrite, there's never been a more important time for us to think that way, because we are in the age of mass production, and we are able to create things faster and cheaper and at scale. And if that is a growing phenomenon, which it will continue to be, what is the narrative behind a product? What's the meaning behind a product? You got to preserve and enforce that even more. If there are more choices, if things are being brought out at a more rapid clip, how are you going to create meaning in a mass world is really why design matters. I mean, in a very oversimplistic way of...
Do you think that the design is creating the meaning, or do you think the designer is helping the company find the meaning?
I think both.
Okay.
I mean, design in its purest sense is a noun and a verb. It's the activity of to our point of how how design takes place through conversation, through process, through execution. And then design can over time, and when done right, become very iconic and meaningful. I mean, look at the great brands out there. You know, why would a Volkswagen Beetle have such a profound place in automotive history? Or why would an iPod, which frankly at the time it came out was less functional than an MP3 player, why would it become so insatiable and important? Because it had an iconic value, from its product design to the fact that Jobs was really at the very heart of that creation, wanting to make music more accessible. He had a love for music, so that drove not only the way they conceived that product, but even the physical and functional and material way it was manufactured and its look and feel. So, and again, I think it's our job, and in a much harder case when you sit inside a company like 3M, which is more of a conservative Midwestern company, to when you get a leader that begins to understand that, and I think the most enlightened CEOs out there, at least where we come from, are beginning to understand that value, the way the process works inside, and how great outcomes in either a material and a service way can come forward because of that process and thinking. I mean, to me, that the intersection of those two things are becoming a very, very vibrant part of the business conversation right now.
So do you think that the culture of Harley has evolved as a result of the design, or do you think that culture was there well before it?
You know, the greatest story about Harley is it's not a story about hardware per se. It's a story about and that cult was created because people felt like they could express themselves through that product. So again, Willie G always called the motorcycle folk art, because once it was sold and delivered to the dealer and somebody took it home, first thing they did is they repainted the tank their own way, they put their own pipes on, they customized that motorcycle to their personality. And again, does BMW, does Ducati, does Honda make products equally as good as Harley? Sure. But do they have the emotional and the lifestyle impact that you associate with Harley? No. So if you go to a party and you ask somebody what they did this weekend, I rode my Harley into the mountains and had the most wonderful weekend. They talk about the whole experience around the motorcycle. Now, if you talk to a BMW rider, and I'm not to say that they wouldn't have a similar emotional experience, the tendency might be there to talk about the engineering and performance of how they got in and out of a curve, or versus maybe a Harley rider saying, 6 friends of ours went into the mountains on our hogs and met at a bar and tore it up. So I think in the case of Harley, design, certainly there's a great story there. I mean, the product design is beautiful, it's unique, it's authentic, it's different. But I think the emotional and the sort of quantum experience that the customer and the lifestyle impact has had around that insatiable desire and interest the customers have, that's the brand halo that makes Harley special. It's really about and truly in that case, it's about the customer and what they do with the product. Because again, they can't compete on the same level as other manufacturers.
Do you think the design drove the development of that community, or do you think the community was there and the stories come out of it?
Design was a small part of, and an important part of, the look and feel of the product, and they take that very, very seriously. But no, I think the real story behind Harley is the community and family of enthusiasts that that, you know, again, create this emotional halo. And you know, the greatest thing about Harley is their product designers go out to rallies and have conversations, or they see what the riders are doing to their bikes, and they bring it back in, and they infuse that into their product development process. So it's there's a great reciprocity there that, you know, is a continuous loop.
And so that's what you're saying, that, you know, understand your customer but don't believe them.
Well,
That's kind of what you mean by that, isn't
if
it?
we want to oversimplify all of this, I think it's really about defining upfront what is the purpose of your brand and the relevance of your brand for a specific target audience. So it's about, first of all, understanding what is the target audience, what is relevant for them, defining the equity of your brand, and then what design is the execution of the equity in every brand touch point. Could be a product, could be a corporate image, could be a collateral, could be anything, an internet site. Is, you know, you are executing that equity and that meaning inside something that people can experience, can touch, they can relate to. So this is really, and design thinking eventually is the way of thinking to arrive to the definition of that equity of the brand, that relevance, to better understand your target audience. Design is the way you execute it inside any touch point.
So do you think then that having the design within the company, it will be the way that it will continue to work? Like, will become more popular, and that having the designers outside in a studio separate will be less
You
so?
desperately need both. If you have just one of the two, I don't think it's going to work. The most mature company leveraging design, they have both. If you don't have design advocates inside the company, it's very tough for the company to understand how to create the best dialogue with external design firms. If you do have just internal designers, you know, the culture of the company may suffocate your creativity, your perspective, the way you look at the world. I mean, as designers, we need to be inspired, we need to cross-fertilize, move, you know, connect dots. And design firms, by interacting with so many different realities and companies, they have that exposure that eventually designers inside the corporation don't. So I think you need an hybrid system where both the two work together. Then, depending on the industry you are in, the geography you are in, depending on many things, the nature of your company, the balance, the ratio could be different. We have firms where designers, corporations where designers are internally are mostly managers, and they work almost exclusively with external firms, design firms. And then we have other situations where the most of the design is done internally, and they use external firms more for inspiration and ignite a different way of thinking inside the company. Again, it depends on the nature of the company, where it is located, and the phase of evolution of design inside the company.
Yeah, and I think conversely, the makeup of the modern design firm needs to and has an opportunity to change. So at least in the States, the design firm landscape is still made up of a great deal of boutiques, very, very centralized focus on creative and execution. But I think the opportunity here is to have a multidisciplinary view on how you design your business. As an owner of a design firm, I have sociologists, technologists, writers, designers. I mean, I chose very early on with my partners to create a multidisciplinary team because we I think at the very beginning understood that design had a bigger potential and role in terms of how we delivered our service to a client and the outcomes that we could advocate for our clients. But I think there's still a great deal of our industry that is very proprietary in the way they've designed their firms, that we're going to be a boutique, I'm going to hire designers, I'm not going to hire design thinkers, that's too much overhead. Or I mean, again, there's exceptions to that rule, but I think if you want to work with great companies, especially large ones that demand return on investment, and they have to, by choice, they have to compete distinctly in the marketplace, then you're going to have to, as a design firm owner or leader, really think about the kind of service you're going to provide your client, because I think you're going to quickly become one of many that bid on or try to get work that's sort of purely executional. And that's what scares me the most when you see 5,000 design students graduating every year in a major city. Where are they going? I mean, if most of them are coming out of curriculums, well, if most of them are coming out of curriculums where they've only learned how to design things and maybe haven't learned how to haven't embraced design thinking, then we're probably going to create more boutique design firms focused on execution. So there's a call to action from design leaders and design educators to begin to really think about what will be the best outcome for design when it comes to A, servicing a client, and B, building a design practice. And we are still stuck in the dark ages when it comes to, you know, how we own, operate, and function as design firm proprietors.
And being able, that other thing that you were talking about yesterday, being able to designers being able to have an understanding of business, articulate the needs, and have a responsibility to shareholder value. That a lot of designers don't actually see that they have that responsibility to a company's shareholder, you know, to shareholders, because ultimately that's why they're being employed, really, surely.
Yeah, I think the business, I mean, we aren't artists per se. I mean, we are designing on behalf of commerce, designing on behalf of companies, many of which are publicly traded and have shareholders. And I think just, you know, infusing that understanding and nurturing it within a design firm setting. And we were lucky because I suppose we were lucky because we started our firm doing, you know, shareholder reports. So we were understanding the bigger, we were sitting in the office of the CEO and the CFO and understanding, you know, not only, you know, how they were going to grow earnings, but how the business was functioning and the story and the narrative behind that, you know, that growth story. So you know, growth isn't a bad thing, business isn't a bad thing, and I think designers tend to think that that it's an opposing force, that, you know, business imperatives somehow clash with creativity, and at the end of the day, you know, finding the nexus, at least in my case and others, I think those are the professional design firms that have ultimately had longevity and have been able to sustain great relationships. They're not opposing forces, and I think to some degree, a lot of designers are bloody artists, and some of them get away with that, and I think you have to be in your soul, but you also have to understand you're doing this for a living.